Hi everyone, I'm delighted to welcome Jan Dubiel to Foundations House today. Welcome Jan. Jan is a nationally and internationally recognised specialist in early childhood education. Most recently he's been working as part of the DFE advisory panel around the reforms to the EYFS. I'd like to welcome you to sunny Lancashire today, Jan. We'll jump straight in. Could I start by asking you to talk a little bit about your journey so far and what makes you so passionate about early childhood education?
Well, I trained as an early years teacher, and I had, which often early years teachers have, early years practitioners have, just a kind of intimate connection with that age phase. And when I decided I wanted to go into teaching, I worked in a primary school as a sort of to see how that worked. It's kind of like work experience, and going into particularly the nursery class, it felt like going home. I felt this is really what I wanted to do. So I was very keen early on that early years was my specialism, and it has been quite a kind of tight niche specialism that I've focused on. So I've taught mostly nursery reception, some year one and even year two, but my heart has always been in what we would describe as early years, what is now the EYFS. And I think the passion for that comes out of several things. One is the nature of children of that age group is the most unpredictable, the most exciting, the most surreal world that you can live in. And I think there's a psychology to that, because some people find that very difficult. I think those of us who are in early years find that actually really exciting, and not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing even in a conversation where that's going to go. But also seeing the progress that children make, because obviously the younger they are, the more visible that is, and seeing that happen almost before your eyes is kind of highly exciting. I've been out of the classroom as a teacher for a while now, and I suppose the reason I'm still passionate is two things really. One is we are more aware than ever of the importance of early years, the importance of that phase of development, particularly birth to 7, what happens neurologically, socially, how children are enculturated, how they become who they are, how they lay the foundations for learning, how they make those neurological connections. And we know that getting that right is critically important. So as a citizen, as a human being, I'm very interested and very concerned, I suppose is the right way, that is right, and that anything we can do in terms of policy, in terms of support, in terms of advice, in terms of inspiration, makes that as good as it can be. I suppose the second thing is coming up really against the misunderstandings of early years, and the fact that it, as a sector, it is quite misunderstood. It's certainly had a lower status, which has got better, but it's still quite viewed in a different way. But the misunderstanding of what early years should be like, and what should be happening, and what it should look like. So I think part of my motivation comes from being able to connect that message, and particularly having that debate with people who are not early years specialists, to say actually what you do at Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, actually that's utterly reliant on what early years teachers and educators do in the EYFS. And it may look different, and some of it is quite counterintuitive, but actually it's really important that you understand it. And I think if we get that message across and we have that broad understanding, I think the view of early years and its status within the panoply, if you like, of education will be greatly enhanced.
Excellent, Jan. So I know you spend a lot of your time overseas in your work. In fact, I think we first met at a conference out in China last year. Where do you think the UK is in terms of its early years strategy, and what more do you think needs to be done?
Well, there's a very interesting paradox here, because I'm sure you picked up from being in China. Internationally, there's this massive reverence for the EYFS, and all countries are really interested in the fact that we have a birth to 5 framework, that we have the characteristics of effective learning, which is an integral part. We value PSCD, physical development, alongside the specific areas which are the more sort of academic aspects of it. So that there is this real reverence out there towards the EYFS. And that sometimes can be quite strange, because coming back to England, you know, the kind of pressure it's under, and the perception of it is very, very different. So in terms of where we are nationally, there has been, obviously we're about to hear the results of the consultation on the review of the EYFS. I think there's been some interesting discussion about whether a review is worthwhile or not, with some very distinguished voices saying, well, no, they didn't think it was, and I totally respect that. However, my opinion is we should always be reflecting on what we do and to make it the best it can be. And actually, certainly having an early learning goal around self-regulation specifically, I think is a very positive step forward. I mean, we wait to see the results of consultation. So we are in that position. I think there are, and always have been, huge tensions in the EYFS. And we are dealing certainly with a professional workforce which feels like it's under siege, feels like it's under constant pressure, feels like we are constantly being stretched and pulled in different ways. What I'm hoping is things like the EYFS review are an opportunity to have that wider debate and that discussion. And to talk about some things I touched on before, about explaining the nature of early years pedagogy, curriculum and assessment, why it's different but connects to the trajectories of children's learning as it goes forward. So I think we are in a state of flux, which I think, to be fair, we are constantly in. I am hoping that over the next couple of years, as the new EYFS beds down, we might have a bit more clarity and certainty and a bit more confidence about what we do. Early years educators should be really confident. They do a massively important job. The interactions and the teaching and the provision that they're involved in has a dramatic impact on children's lives. We have early years educators have 1,000 interactions a day. Each of those interactions changes the brain architecture of a child, and we should be really aware of that. And understand that what we do in early years lays those strong foundations for what happens later. We will always live in this state of flux and tension. I think that's, I've been in this, I know, as an early years specialist for many years now, and there's never been a time when it's been calm. So I'm accepting that's part of it, and I think we have to feel that and be confident and responsive and dynamic enough to kind of work with it.
Absolutely. So you mentioned there that there's obviously the ongoing review currently to both the EYFS and the inspection framework. What's driving those reforms, and what are the main objectives of them?
Well, certainly in terms of the EYFS review, it's, I think, reshaping the early learning goals so that they are perhaps a little bit more up to date, a little bit more reflective of what we know about early child development. I think that's one of the drivers. There's a big driver around workload. And particularly in the context of recording, documenting and tracking and using data and using next steps. And I think there's awareness, which is not new, that sometimes people get caught into this kind of vortex of expectation and they end up doing things because they think they need to do them rather than having a clear idea of why they're doing them, for what purpose. And I think that maxim is very strong both in the EYFS but also particularly in the Ofsted framework, about being able to explain why you do what you do. And I think the more empowered we make ourselves, the more confident we are about explaining the approaches we take and being diverse and being flexible and being individual about that. I think the more effective we will be. I would really like to see an early years sector which is much more critical and eclectic about how they do things. I worry sometimes that we often get initiatives or we often get particular schools of thought that say you should do this or you mustn't do that. And actually I would prefer practitioners who were selective about that and said, well, this is my approach, I will take these bits. Teaching is naturally, your educational philosophy is naturally eclectic by nature. So they would be confident about taking and rejecting things because they know what works best for the children that they work with and also what works best for them as an individual educator. We talk about the unique child, which is part of the EYFS. Well, educators are unique too. They have different strengths, they have different ways of doing things, different kind of perceptions of how things work, and we should absolutely be respecting that. So we should be looking at the outcomes for children. You know, the Chinese proverb, there are many routes to the top of the mountain, but the view is always the same. And I think if we're focused on good outcomes for children, but less concerned about how we get there as long as we do get there, and less concerned about what that looks like, then I think that makes us much more effective as a community.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned there earlier on when you were answering that last question that one of the objectives was to reduce workload burdens and shifting the focus to the curriculum rather than excessive assessment and assessment for assessment's sake. Do you feel that technology's got a part to play in these reforms, and if so, how do you think?
Technology is, as with anything, it's how it's used. It's both an angel and a demon. And I think, again, going back to what I've just said, I think if people are more confident about what they're doing and more critical and more self-reflective and more responsive to say, I can use technology in this way, then it'll be something positive. You know, as with many things in early years, I think sometimes people get sucked into having to use it because that's what you do. And that's when possibly it's used less effectively. So I don't think the technology itself is necessarily the issue. It's about the core professional understanding of how to use it effectively.
Yeah, so it's being used in the right circumstances.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So the consultation for the reforms closed at the end of January this year. What are the next steps, pardon the pun, in order to hit the voluntary opt-in date of September 20 and the statutory rollout in September 21? So what happens next?
Well, we are waiting for the government to respond to the review, so they will need to do that by the end of April. So we are hoping that, certainly maybe this term or early next term, we will have the definitive position on what's going to happen, and then things can move forward. I think that gives us a term for early adopters, which will be schools, to kind of fully embrace the new early learning goals and the programs of study. I think in terms of the profile, they will have a little bit more time because the profile assessment will take place in the summer term 2021. So in terms of the exemplification of those early learning goals and any other supporting guidance document, there's a little bit of a window there. Although development matters isn't part of the consultation because it's non-statutory, it is going to be kind of road tested, and again that will be available for people to look at hopefully quite soon, and we can see how that's kind of been reconfigured around what is right for children, what is going to work, and all the lessons I think we've learned over the kind of current iteration, which will then be the previous iteration of development matters. Yes, I think we are going into a period of some change and some sort of realignment. But as I said in one of the previous answers, I think we need to see that as an opportunity for really looking at the fundamentals of good practice. What is it we want? What do we want to achieve? How do we do it? How do we ensure that the professionalism of the workforce is the thing that is paramount in all of this? And that those individual decisions that practitioners and teachers and educators take every single day, 1,000 times a day, that they come from the right place and they're fully informed by everything around them.
Absolutely. And then, one thing I'm interested in is how can the proposed changes are going to come into place at the September 20 from an opt-in point of view, from a statutory point of view 21. How's the effectiveness going to be of any of those changes going to be measured, and what's the current process to evaluate this?
That's a really good question. I mean, the government have a number of initiatives which are looking at specific outcomes and specific projects. I'm not aware at this point whether there is a specific evaluation of this. Then there may be. Certainly, the Education Endowment Foundation were very involved in the pilot.
Is the pilot going to be extended? Or is it literally just going straight to opt-in?
No, the pilot has finished.
Yeah.
The pilot finished this last summer. So there's a very well documented evaluation of that, which is in the public domain. So I think that kind of forms the basis, which I think then went into the consultation. So we'll need to wait and see what happens in terms of consultation, whether it is identical to the consultation questions or whether any changes have been made. And then I think we'll certainly have a period of time before it hits the ground absolutely in 2021, and that might be the point where we look at how that's going to be evaluated and the impact it has. I think, as with every reform, the key driver is on how do we enhance outcomes for children. And I think the idea of the revising the early learning goals and some of the aspects around it, saying how can we make this the best it can be, how can we make this as effective as possible for the children that we work with.
Excellent. And thinking about it from a technological standpoint, again, being a technology business, but this time not from the practitioner's point of view, but more from the analysis perspective. Do you think that the better use of data technologies could help support to evaluate the proposed changes, and the evolution of data science could support both current and future reforms?
I mean, I think there is huge scope for some really interesting analysis of the various forms of data that we have around children through systems like Connect, and other ones are available, I'm allowed to say it. But looking at that really critically and really intelligently to say, well, what does it tell us about these children? What does it tell us about their trajectories? What does it tell us about the impact it has, what interventions, what contexts, what kind of nuances of practice are impacting on what happens to these children? There's an interesting study, part of the EPI study, called Achieving Against the Odds, which looked at children who had a predicted kind of low trajectory but ended up doing really well. And so what they looked at was what were the features of those children's experience, what flipped over that one trajectory into another, what made them more successful than their starting point suggested they would be. And I think that was again, that's about 10 years old. I think this is another time for perhaps looking at that and saying, well, how do we optimise the impact we have on children's outcomes? That is what we all want to do. And are there particular approaches, are there particular aspects that are really are universally successful, and if so, what are they? Because that will help.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, and there's a number of factors that could be analysed that could then be evidence to potentially close an attainment gap. I wonder, and I think parental engagement is obviously often referred to, and I wondered, how large a part do you feel that the home learning environment plays in narrowing those development gaps and ultimately improving social mobility?
Well, the research around that is incredibly potent and unambiguous. That the home learning environment has the biggest single impact. And actually in that research I cited, Achieving Against the Odds, that's one of the first things was the process of active cultivation in parenting. So it was the approaches to parenting and the types of interactions and the child's engagement with all kinds of things through parental support that made a vital difference. So we need to make sure that engagement with parent remains a absolute core feature of what we do. It will vitally change children's life chances.
And so there's a couple more questions before I come on to the final one, but you mentioned in the talk that you've just given here that the EYFS profile is the only data set that we currently have in early years, and that we're entering a period of wobbly data. What do you think the impact of this is?
I think, to kind of explain that phrase, I think whenever the profile changes, there's always a kind of a reconfiguring of how it works. And I think people internalise how the profile, reception teachers internalise how the profile works. So after a couple of years, it becomes a process that they go through. So when that all changes, which is what will happen, I think that things need to be realigned. So all I would say is we need to just have that caveat in the back of our minds when we're looking at profile data, perhaps over the first couple of years, so that as it settles down, then we'll have a clearer view of it.
Clearly, there's going to be a difference from one as it transitions
Well,
from one
we're
to
going
the
to use two different sets of early learning goals, so that is obviously going to be a challenge, and I'm sure we will see data anomalies as a result of that. But I think we have a clear rationale for why that's the case.
Absolutely. So, final question, and with one eye on the future landscape for early childhood education. By the time the changes become statutory, it'll be almost 10 years since the last reforms came into force following the Tickell review. What are your hopes for the next decade, and what will constitute the success of current reforms in your mind?
Well, I think this is almost a summary of kind of everything I've said in this interview. Really, that I would really like to see a confident workforce across the board. I'd like to see practitioners and educators who are really confident and proud about their professionalism, and confident and responsive to take decisions they know are right for children. So many things I talked about, internalising the curriculum, the actual curriculum compared to the prescribed curriculum, the process of decision making, the 1,000 interactions you have a day. These are all elements of what makes for early years practice. And I think one of the tensions we face is practitioners are often not always 100% confident about what they're doing. I think they're often trying to second guess what they think they're supposed to do. And I think that's one of the things I would like to see a lot less of. So practitioners who are able to articulate why they're doing, have a really strong philosophy, are accessing CPD, are having those conversations, doing that deep internal reflection, accessing different qualifications, being really proud and proactive about the important role they do. And I think if we do that, we will have something to be really proud of. We have the framework in place to do that, the framework of masses of hundreds of years of fantastic early years education. The early years, certainly the British nursery school system particularly, which is over 100 years old, influenced the world, influenced Reggio Emilia. We have an incredible tradition and history in the UK of addressing those things, and I would like us to be a lot prouder of that, a lot more confident. I'd also like everyone to understand early years, not just people in education but the whole world, understand how how children learn, understand about early neuroscience. I think that should be a component for everybody in society, and to really understand why we work with children the way we do, and what are the things that really matter.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for visiting us at Foundations House. I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.